Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us for another study with One Source Ministries. Today's study may tend to be just a touch controversial to some people, but I really felt with what I've seen in the news recently, and I'm not talking the mainstream media, I'm talking about alternative news outlets that I go to as my regular source for real news. There's been a lot of controversy in the news lately, and I really feel compelled that I need to draw a distinction between the term Zionism and what people conflate that to mean versus real Judaism, because they lump the two together and the two are not even compatible. So that's what I want to talk about this morning. It's really important to know the distinction between Zionism and even Zionism as it's defined now and what true Zionism really is, as opposed to Judaism. So let's get into the first part that I want to talk about, and that's human nature at its core. And I'm going to make this very brief, but human nature at its core, at its very basic, really comes down to nature versus nurture. There are some traits that are genetic, and you can't get away from them. The color of your eyes, the color of your skin, the color of your hair. Maybe you have a tendency towards diabetes or cholesterol, or there may be a myriad of things that genetically compose who you are. That is entirely different than the traits that are learned. Your personality, some parts of your personality may be genetically imposed upon you, but the lion's share of who you are as a person is learned behavior. And the reason I know that this is true is you can have twins separated at birth, and they will absolutely have some things that are innate. They're raised in different families, but they have characteristics that are very similar. But yet they can be entirely different people as far as their worldview, the things that they like to do, don't like to do, the way they treat other people. So you can look at study after study. I'm not going to go into that, but I just want to break it down so that you understand that there's a difference between traits that are genetically inherited and traits that are environmentally inherited. Okay? Huge difference. And the reason that I want to go into that is we have a world built on bias because of learned traits. Now, anybody that's been with me for any period of time will know that I'm biased. I absolutely have a biblical worldview. I believe that the Bible itself is actually a real book written by real people, inspired by a real God, about real history, about real prophecy of things that were going to happen that have happened, prophecy about things that are going to happen that have not happened yet, and a roadmap for mankind to find reconciliation with God, the only one true God, creator of heaven and earth. Okay? That is my biblical worldview. Now, that's my bias, and I am not ashamed to tell everybody that that's how I view the world. Okay? There are other people that have other biases. You look at scientists, they have their own bias. They won't admit it. They want to pretend like they're completely objective, and they only look at the facts. But the reality is, they only look at the facts they want to look at. They ignore other facts that don't fit in with their bias of worldview, and they'll disregard them as implausible or untrue in favor of the ones that, even though they're implausible and possibly untrue as well, they'll say these are true, these aren't. So they have their own bias, and I will use evolution specifically because they'll say that evolution is the path to truth, but what they won't tell the people is that behind the scenes, they continually change their theories so that they can mold and shape. When the facts dispute what they believe, they'll change their beliefs, they'll change the framework so that now this new set of beliefs that supports evolution is real. Again, a world built on bias. You see it in academia, you see it in even religions. There's worlds built on biases. And specifically, there's a bias throughout the world in both the Protestant world the Catholic world in some instances, and specifically the Muslim world, there's a hatred of Jews and Zionism. It is a worldview bias. And you can see it very clearly if you look at the UN. This week there was another resolution passed. I don't know how it got passed, but it got passed, that basically condemns the Jews and removes them. They basically want to remove them from Israel altogether. They certainly want to turn over Jerusalem to the Muslims, with the Jews not being involved at all. It is absolutely a biased institution that wants to eliminate the Jews from Israel. Okay? We have a world bias. What I want to look at with regard to Zionism, though, is what are the true roots of Zionism? Oops. There we go. It is a national movement that began in the 1800s to reestablish a Jewish homeland due to the mistreatment and rampant anti-Semitism throughout the world, specifically in Europe, but also in the Middle East. There was rampant anti-Semitism, and they basically started to rise up and say, listen, we need to go somewhere where we can live and not be bothered by all these people that hate us. Now, if you do any study of, I'll go as far back as the Reformation and through the Protestant churches, you would think that because we believe in the same Bible and we believe in the same God, that we would have the same feelings of, I don't want to say nationalism, that's the wrong word, but a sense of allegiance to the Jewish people as Christians and Protestants. But the reality is, if you look at people like Martin Luther, and there's a number of others in the mix, they hated the Jews. And they persecuted the Jews. So much so that when Martin Luther took over a city, and I don't remember the name of the city, he forbid the Jews to even live in the city. So you can look at the founders of our faith and even the Reformation and try and give them all kinds of accolades and put them on pedestals. But the reality is they didn't have a sound biblical worldview. They looked at the Jews as being cast aside forever by God, when if you read the Old Testament, it is absolutely clear that God's intent is, I love the Jews, and that love is eternal, and I have a plan for them that is eternal. They are never going to be cast aside. Yes, they are going to fall under my thumb of judgment if they reject me, but if they accept me, my love is eternal for them. He has a plan that goes for eternity. So I don't know how people that claim to be Christians and followers of Jesus Christ, who himself was a Jew, somehow can come out as anti-Semites. It makes no sense. But because of that, they were seeking their own Jewish homeland. And that led to the Balfour Declaration, the Sykes-Picot Agreement, and the Palestinian Mandate that was allowed by the UN. And basically, the very short version of that is the Balfour Declaration said, hey, listen, guys, you can see what's going on here in the world. There is persecution. We need to find a place for these people to live. And the Sykes-Picot Agreement was basically an agreement between the British and the French, who already had control over large portions of the Middle East. And after World War I, they carved up the Middle East so that there was Iraq and there was Syria. And they sliced up the Ottoman Empire so that they gave all these false borders. And as a result of the Balfour Declaration and the Sykes-Picot Agreement and the UN finally agreeing that the Jews needed some place to live, they came up with the Palestinian Mandate. And basically, even though it's a ridiculous way that they carved up the state of Israel, they carved it up so a certain portion, almost 50%, was Palestinian and 50% was Israeli or Jewish. As a result, nobody was happy. But that's the roots of Zionism. The people that were Jews wanted some place to live where they weren't going to be persecuted. They could just live in peace. That's the basics of it. But that's not what Zionism today, when people talk about Zionism, that's not what they conflate it to mean. Today, there's a distortion of Zionism that instead of a near national movement to reestablish a Jewish homeland, Zionism is viewed as a means of world domination. And they'll use something called the Protocols of Zion. Now, this book, they purport it to be written by Jews. It is absolutely, was it written by Jews? Probably absolutely written by Jews. Was it written by Jews that were seeking Judaism and what God prescribed for Judaism in the Old Testament? Absolutely not. Because basically what this book says is Jews are good, non-Jews are bad. They call them the Goyim. Anybody that's a non-Jew is a Goyim. In the New Testament, oftentimes it's referred to as the Jews and the Gentiles. Okay, but basically Jews are good, non-Jews are bad. And the whole book, somebody gave this book to me a long time ago and I read it, and although it speaks very true to what's going on in the world today, it is absolutely bogus to try and conflate that this represents the true Jews who want to be followers of Yahweh. Because it purports world domination through monetary and economic policy, money and economic wars, materialism replacing religion, that the Jews are responsible for every monetary thing that happens in the world, world wars, control of the press, brainwashing. I mean, it's a pretty elaborate book. And again, if you look at what's going on in the world today, it really does reflect our reality. However, it doesn't reflect the truth of who Jews that are true Jews are, or Jews that are Jewish by heritage, but do truly want to control the world. That two separate things. If you want to read the book, you don't have to buy a copy of it. You can go to this link that's on the bottom of this page, www.biblioteca, whatever that is, .net, Sociopolitica, and then you just go to the rest. Put it on pause, copy that, and put it in your browser, and you'll be able to come up with a copy of it and read it yourself. It's enlightening reading, but you cannot conflate the Protocols of Zionism with true Judaism. They're two completely different things. But yet, the world built on biases will look at the Rothschilds, which are really the brainchilds behind our banking system as we know it today, and the central banking systems in every country. They started back in Europe with the mother of all banks, and they're still politically involved today. And then they'll look at people like Janet Yellen in charge of the Federal Reserve, or Michael Bloomberg, that had the former mayor of New York, who has his own financial media enterprise, and people like Mark Zuckerberg, the president of Facebook. And I could go through lists of people that have Jewish heritage and are in major positions of power in the media and entertainment and the financial world. And they'll say, see, look, there's Jews running everything. And my answer to that is, so what? There's Germans up there too, and there's Dutch people up there too, and there's people from France and Italy and Poland. There's lots of people of different nationalities in the higher echelons of every industry. What I'm going to point out today, though, is that this world built on bias actually has some truth to it. And I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I just follow the money, and I follow the trail to find out what is the truth behind all these stories. That leads me to Ronald Bernard. He is a retired not in the sense that he's no longer working, but he decided to sidestep his positions of power. He was a very high-level Dutch financier who was at the very highest echelons of power with regard to moving money and taking care of the people that actually control the large pockets of wealth. And there's an interview that's about 40 minutes long where he goes through his start in the financial world and how he rose to power and ultimately what made him get out. Because as you listen to the interview, he basically said that the gentleman that brought him in, because of his expertise in a specific area, the guy said, listen, I'm going to bring you in, but I want you to understand, you have to be able to come in and have no conscience. You can't be looking over your shoulder with any kind of remorse for some of the things that you're about to do. And this guy basically said, hey, listen, no problem, I'm in. But he talks about it as, being compartmentalized. He put everything in a freezer, and he lived his life with all this information in the freezer. He said, but eventually the freezer started to break down, and he could no longer live with himself with some of the things. Look at the caption on just this picture. It says, we're talking about financing wars, creating wars, so basically creating a lot of misery in this world. That's just one aspect of the thing that he talks about, because he talks about complete manipulation of every portion of society, from the financial to the political to the military. That these people that are in power control everything. And I've been saying this for years, and I can prove it on a financial side, but I don't have the connections to connect all the dots on the other side. I can do it on the financial side. That's my background. But I don't have the ability to connect all the dots on the other side, except for what I've tried to put together with regard to what the UN makes available, and that all roads do lead to the tentacles of power that you can trace to the UN. I mean, when you go through all the different government entities and non-governmental entities that are stationed in Switzerland, you can see very clearly that there are certain people at the top of the power chain, and everything filters down from there. This guy really exposes the world's elite, and he basically says there's somewhere between 8,000 and 8,500 people at the very top that control everything. And he's speaking from experience. He also says that they have complete economic, political, and military control. They pull the powers of everything. They're in charge of money laundering, which I think is laughable, because I have to abide by money laundering rules, and I've had all these layers of regulations placed upon me as a financial professional, and it comes from the top down. You can go all the way to the Bank for International Settlements and the Financial Stability Board, and you can trace where it comes from there, and it spreads out through every country across this globe. And yet the ones that are telling us we have to be watchdogs and look out for this stuff are the very ones that are doing it themselves. It's all projection. And that's another psychological facet of life that I won't get into, but they are in control of money laundering and monetary manipulation in every way, from interest rates to banking, I'll say monetary policy in general, from the central banks in every country to how they trade amongst themselves, commodity prices, interest rates, gold prices, even in the financial markets. Because they have such large blocks of business, they can manipulate the cost of stocks by how they trade and how they bet against those stocks. And one that really just sticks out to me is Tesla, because Tesla, although they have many ways in which they make money, it's laughable to think that here's this, I don't care about their battery division or SpaceX and all the tentacles they have. The reality is you can't have a company like Tesla that is losing $1 billion, almost $1 billion per year, and doesn't have nearly the sales of a company like GM or Ford, and yet they're valued, their market share, because of how many shares outstanding and the price of their stocks individually, they're valued higher than a GM or Ford, that are making $5 to $6 billion in profit every single year. So you can see that the people that are in charge of the financial markets have the ability to manipulate, and they've been in trouble numerous times. I've done studies on this before. I could give you the information, but I'm not going to do it today, about manipulation after manipulation after manipulation that they've been caught doing, and nobody ever goes to jail. But it gets worse. He talks about an evil system that hates humanity and wants to destroy it. In his own words, it hates our guts. It hates creation and wants to destroy it. Those are his words in this interview. And he talks about the fact that the people who don't underestimate its impact are very few, basically saying there's not a lot of people out there that understand what's really going on. Everybody is just going along. They're just fat, dumb, and happy, living their lives, and they don't understand what's really going on behind the scenes. But here's where it gets really interesting, because after he talks about the protocols of Zion, and he blames, he tries to conflate it to the same thing that everybody else does, talking about the Jews. He specifically mentions the fact that it's Luciferians and it's specifically Satanism that's at the root, not Judaism. So he's talking about Zionism, but he puts it in direct correlation with Satanism, not Judaism. And then he specifically says the thing that got him out was when they wanted him to do child sacrifices. He's like, okay, I'm done. This goes too far. Let that sink in for a minute. The people that are in control, the people at the very top, the people that are pulling the levers of power are involved in Satanism and child sacrifices. Which leads me to news that came out this week. Playpen, the investigation into Playpen started in 2014 when the person that was in the dark web started this child porn website and they were investigating it. And if you look at this, as a result of that, this week, the FBI and Europol released the statistics of what's happened so far in what they've produced. 25 U.S. producers of child pornography have been prosecuted. 51 U.S.-based hands-on abusers have been prosecuted. 55 U.S. children have been successfully identified or rescued. 296 sexually abused children identified or rescued internationally. In the U.S., there's been 350 arrests, and they say 584 international arrests. Look at that number, 898 international arrests tied to this investigation. So almost 900 people that are involved in child pornography worldwide. Now, why am I talking about child pornography when I'm, just the slide before, I'm talking about child sacrifices? Because the reality is, there is corruption that goes to the highest echelons of our governments today, and it's being swept under the rug. We need to be walking around with our eyes wide open, and we need to be aware that what we see and what's being spoon-fed to us is not the reality of the world around us. It's only what these people in the positions of power want us to see, want us to believe, and want us to understand with regard to the truth. Europol, again, reiterates it. It says major online child sexual abuse operation leads to 368 arrests in Europe. And you can see this excerpt says, this has so far resulted in 368 arrests or convictions in Europe alone, 870 worldwide, and at least 259 sexually abused children identified or rescued from their abusers outside of the U.S. That's just the ones that have been sexually abused and identified. What about the ones that have been taken and the missing children that have not been given back to their parents, that have been part of this child sacrifice system? Now, you can call me crazy. I don't even care. Because the reality is, the truth needs to get out. And I'm not going to be a silent voice sitting on the sidelines when I can see this stuff and I can identify it. And there are people that are trying to beat the drum, but this will never make the national media. Because the people in the positions of power don't want this stuff to get out. This is real information that if you just do a little bit of digging, you can see it. It's all right there in black and white. And yet it's being suppressed because if the people knew what was really going on, they wouldn't allow for it to happen. So now let's switch gears and let's look at what true Judaism is, because it's nothing like what it's being portrayed as. Exodus 20 says, and God spoke all these words, saying, I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself a carved image or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is in the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. You shall not bow down to them or serve them. For I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children to the third and fourth generation of those who hate me, but showing steadfast love to thousands of those who love me and keep my commandments. Here God was setting a precedent. And this is part of the Ten Commandments. But he's saying, listen, you have to understand that I created everything. I am the only God. And you need to serve me and disregard all these other false gods out there. Because false gods existed in the days that these commands were given. And God was warning, don't turn to the left or turn to the right. Serve me and me only, and things will go well for you. If you don't, there's going to be consequences to pay. Jesus himself, a Jew, reiterated what true Judaism and ultimately what true followers of God through him, Jesus Christ, how they should live. Jesus replied, you must love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, and all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. A second is equally important. Love your neighbor as yourself. The entire law and all the demands of the prophets are based on these two commandments. Now, Jesus was summarizing all of the Old Testament. And if you go through all of the laws that started in Exodus, and really when you go through the book of Leviticus, you can see that there were basically laws for everything. Laws for how to treat people, how to treat dead things, how to treat disease. There were laws for everything, even on how to manage your money. They had laws and guidelines for everything. And God was saying, if you live this way, I'm not trying to overburden you with things that are hard for you to live by. I'm trying to give you a way that will allow you to live with a sense of honor and freedom. People look at the Ten Commandments as a list of don'ts. And the reality is, if we all lived that way, it'd be an awesome place to live on this planet. But we don't. And as a result, we've reaped the harvest of our own sin. But when you look at how God commanded us to live and what true Judaism is completely different than the way they portray it with Zionism. Because when you read the Old Testament, it's not about world domination. Unless you conflate world domination to God's desire that everybody should come to a knowledge of who he is and serve him and fall under his leadership and guidance so that his love and his mercy and his grace can be extended to them and not his judgment. If that's world domination, then yeah, I'm all for world domination. But it's not about putting people under the thumb and controlling wars and controlling all the money and controlling things the way they portray Zionism. Joshua, when he was at the end of his life, he says, now therefore fear the Lord and serve him in sincerity and in faithfulness. Put away the gods that your fathers served beyond the river and in Egypt, and serve the Lord. And if it is evil in your eyes to serve the Lord, choose this day whom you will serve, whether the gods of your fathers served in the region beyond the river, or the gods of the Amorites in whose land you dwell. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. Basically, Joshua was giving them a command. You need to choose right now who you're going to serve. Are you going to be obedient and get the blessings that God has said that you're going to get? When Moses was finishing his life, he gave, in the book of Leviticus, I think it's the 23rd chapter, maybe it's the 26th chapter, but it gives all kinds of warnings that God was specifically giving to the children of Israel. If you serve me, you will be blessed and you will live in prosperity and freedom and in peace. But if you don't, I'm going to judge you. And if you still don't serve me, I'm going to judge you 7 times worse. And if you still don't judge me, I'm going to judge you 7 times worse. So that not only will you come to poverty, but you'll go into captivity and you'll live in constant fear, so that when somebody snaps a twig behind you, you're going to go running for your life. I mean, he made it very clear that if they didn't serve him, they were going to face calamity. And what happened after they took possession of the promised land? They didn't follow through on what God commanded them to do, and they didn't serve them the way they were supposed to. Judges chapter 2 says, and the people of Israel did what was evil in the sight of the Lord and served the Baals, which means they served the gods. That's just a blanket term that means gods. And they abandoned the Lord, the God of their fathers, who had brought them out of the land of Egypt. They went after other gods from among them, the gods of the peoples who were around them, and bowed down to them. And they provoked the Lord to anger. They abandoned the Lord and served the Baals and the Ashtaroth. Judges 2:19. But whenever the judges died, because God raised up judges, because God had pity, they would be under the bondage of the Amorites or the Philistines or the Canaanites or the Moabites. There would be people that God would allow to rise up and put them under bondage, just as he said. But then, as they complained and he saw that they were too heavily oppressed, he would raise up a judge to deliver them, and they would be victorious and they would live in peace. But whenever the judge died, they turned back and were more corrupt than their fathers, going after other gods, serving them and bowing down to them. They did not drop any of their practices and their stubborn ways. And one of the gods that they served was a Canaanite god called Molek. And one of the things that they did in their worship to Molek, 2 Kings says that no one might burn his son or his daughter as an offering to Molek. They would take their children and they would sacrifice them to Molek in the fire. So here you had people that were of Jewish heritage that were not followers of God. They were not Jews as far as Judaism goes. They had a Jewish heritage. Yes, they were Jewish as far as their roots, their DNA, their genetic traits. But they were not Jews in the sense that they were followers after God in the Jewish tradition of the Hebrew faith. They were just Jews by their heritage and how they were, or their lineage. That has nothing to do with it. So here, these people, they were serving other gods. And yes, they were Jewish, but they weren't Jewish with regard to their religious beliefs. Two very different things. And that's what we see going on in the world today. Yes, we have people in positions of power that may be Jews, but there are other nationalities at the top amongst those 8,000 to 8,500 people. And yes, they absolutely want world dominance. And they do absolutely pull the levers of power. And they have positions where they can influence every aspect of our lives. Absolutely. I've gone over that ad infinitum with various studies. I can prove it financially, and I can show you the path, how you get there on the parts of it. But just because they have a Jewish heritage does not mean that they're Jews with regard to their belief in God and following after him. Two completely different things. And you can't conflate the two. You need to understand there's a difference between Zionism and Judaism. This is what I wanted to point out, because this just goes to show how there are nefarious elements alive and well today. Now, I don't care if this is a tongue-in-cheek passage, but this is an excerpt from one of the Clinton emails that you can see was unclassified by the U.S. State Department. With fingers crossed, the old rabbit foot out of the box in the attic, I will be sacrificing a chicken in the backyard to Molek. Now, Molek, spelled M-O-L-O-C-H, is the same as Molek, M-O-L-E-C-H, which I just referenced. Why in the world? I mean, this isn't stuff you play with. This isn't funny business. Why in the world would this even be in an email? If there aren't nefarious intents with the people at the highest echelons of power throughout our world today. We have to understand that it's not crazy to connect the dots and to walk into this world with eyes wide open and understand that our battle isn't with flesh and blood. It is with powers and principalities in high places. We are engaged in a spiritual battle that goes back to the very foundations of this world in Eden, with Satan himself that absolutely hates God's creation and wants to destroy it from the floor up. He hates God's creation, specifically humans, because they were put in charge of the world that Satan was cast down to, and they were set as supreme over the angels. Read it in the Bible, it's all there. And God commanded Adam, possess the world and take dominion over it. And what did Adam do? What did Eve do? They fell subject to the lust of their flesh and the desires of their heart. They were tempted and they gave in and they bit the forbidden fruit. And their eyes were open to the fact that, whoops, we sinned. And now, we as human beings live under that curse of sin because Adam and Eve switched allegiances from God to themselves. And now they're under the bondage of the ruler of this world, who is Satan. And Satan is doing his dead level best to destroy us. 1 Peter says, be sober, be vigilant, because your adversary the devil walks about like a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour. Jesus said in Matthew 10, behold, I am sending you out as sheep in the midst of wolves. So be wise as serpents and innocent as doves. Beware of men, for they will deliver you over to courts and flog you in their synagogues. And you will be dragged before governors and kings for my sake, to bear witness before them and the Gentiles. Whenever they deliver you over, do not be anxious how you are to speak or what you are to say. For what you are to say will be given you in that hour. For it is not you who speak, but the Spirit of your Father speaking through you. We are living in a time right now, if you have not been made aware, that Christians are under persecution worldwide. Jews have been under persecution, but Christians are absolutely under persecution worldwide. And the world is trying to shut us up and put us in the corner so that we can't influence the things that I'm revealing today. Because Satan has an agenda, and his agenda is in full force within the Muslim community, because that religion is created by Satan himself. And you look at the powers that are in the UN and the powers that are in the Muslim world, and you can see them working together. How is it that those two that would apparently be at odds against each other, because the UN is supposed to be about world peace and human rights and the dignity of all humans, and the Muslim world is completely different from that, and yet they give cover to it over and over again. And who do they always want to persecute? They want to persecute the Israelis, who the true Jew is doing nothing other than wanting to live in peace. Just leave us alone and let us have some place to live where we can worship God and be at peace with ourselves and our fellow man. But they want to make it seem like they're in cahoots with everybody that's in the positions of power, the U.S. included, to dominate the world. And I'm here to tell you, the U.S. is no innocent child sitting on the sidelines. We are corrupt to the core. That's a topic for another day. The reality is there are powers at the top that are being influenced by Satan to devour this world and to destroy Christians specifically. But it was all foretold by Jesus that in the end these things must happen so that the end can take place exactly as it's been described. We need to be aware. We need to be as wise as serpents and innocent as doves. We need to go out with a wisdom that's directly from God so that we can confront evil, but not on a physical basis. We need to be aware that that battle is spiritual, and we need to engage it spiritually. Yeah. Another one that was just brought up was abortion. I mean, there's so many different ways in which the tentacles of this regime of evil and death are trying to take control and not only suppress the truth, but suppress people and population. I mean, it goes so deep and it's so vast. The reality is we need to be wise as serpents and gentle as doves, being led by the Holy Spirit so that we can speak truth to power, but do it in a way that recognizes the distinction between the individual and the spiritual aspects, so that we're not villainizing people groups or individuals, that we can reach to them with the love of God and hopefully open as many eyes as possible to the truth that surrounds us. That's my message today. As we close every week, we're going to close with communion so that we can remember The reason that we gather together and the reason that we study the Word of God is because He provided a path of reconciliation through the death and sacrifice of Jesus on the cross and His resurrection from the dead. So as Jesus did in the upper room, He took the bread and He broke it and He gave it to His disciples and He said, "This is my body, which is broken for you. Take and eat." So in remembrance of His sacrifice, we eat. Afterward, we know He took the cup and He said, "This is my blood which is shed for the forgiveness of your sins. Take and drink." So in remembrance, we drink. Heavenly Father, as we close this study, I pray that the truth of who You are and what You want for humanity will be seen through this study, and that people's eyes will be opened up to the distinction between Zionism and Judaism, and the fact that You love Your chosen people, Israel, and that You have a plan for them, and that Christians that don't understand, that somehow think that there's some kind of replacement theology where Christians have taken the place of the Jews and the promise, and the Jews have been cast aside. Lord, I pray that their eyes would be open to the fact that You have a never-ending, everlasting love for the people of Israel, that they will always find Your favor if they turn to seek You. Lord, I pray that You would open up the eyes of the people of Israel, that they would understand who Jesus is and what He came to accomplish. Lord, I pray Your will would be done, and that it would be done quickly, and that You would redeem Your chosen people, both Jews and Christians. Lord, that You could establish Your kingdom here on earth, and You could eradicate evil once and for all. Lord, I pray that You would come quickly. I ask this all in Your precious and holy name, Lord Jesus. Amen. One more time, I thank you. This has been a study with One Source Ministries. Thank you for joining us. Continue to join us as we study the Word of God.